Peace. Welcome to another episode of that deep shit where what do, y'all? We connect them dots. On today's episode, we will be discussing the topic of reincarnation. Okay? Let's begin. So before we get into this topic, we must understand some things. Before this planet, before this existence that we know of as this planet on the third dimension, things were not physical. Things were more so very etheric and spiritual. So there were no physical objects that you can touch and taste and all that. All the senses that you can have that can observe this reality did not exist because it was a ethereal realm. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but it had to do with a lot of ethers. The spirits existed. Your soul that is inside of your body existed before your body did. It was already here. Why is that? Because energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It just exists and then just transforms. That's all it does, because it just is. Okay, so now that we understand this is teachings from the Gnostics and other very, very ancient texts. If you can get your hands on any type of Gnostic books or teachings, definitely dive into that. So now that we understand that this realm was not physical, it was more of a spiritual mosh posh of different soul groups. Now that we can move into the next topic. The next topic is the topic of incarnate or carnate. The word carnate or incarnate simply means to case in flesh, to wrap flesh around. So incarnate means wrapping flesh around something. So now that we understand that this world or plane or dimension was ethereal, we have to understand now that to incarnate means to wrap flesh around what? Around the soul. Now the next thing to kind of tackle is who wrapped flesh around the soul. Now this is when we get into the topics of demiurges. Now, I'm not going to go into specific names of the demiurges. I'll let you do that for yourself. But what I will say is that there are a demiurge or maybe a group of demiurges that are responsible for what we call creation. Now, if you go into old religious texts like the Torah or the Tanakh in Judaism, you will learn about the stories of creation. Especially in Kabbalistic teachings, they teach about the condensation of how soul or God form or souls of gods condensate down from levels. It's called the Ein Sof. Something around that. Dig into that. I'll let y'all go into that extra deep shit. All right. So, what you want to call the demiurge is what most religious texts refer to as, who God is. You know what I'm saying? There's a whole story about who God is, okay? So I'll let y'all uncover that for yourselves. But the demiurge is responsible for trapping the souls or the energies that were above it or greater than it. So it trapped these souls. And how it trapped the souls was by encasing them in flesh. This refers back to a lot of biblical stories of fallen ones. You know what I'm saying? And here's a tip. When you hear about stories that you may perceive as good, bad, good, evil, don't look at that like that, because whoever's telling the story is telling the story from their perspective. So what you should do is gather the information, collect as much as you can, and do the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding on it. I digress. So anyhow, the demiurge encases the souls on the ethers in the etheric realm, okay, to create beings. Now, mind you, like I said, this earth didn't really exist in the form that it did before. It was very, it was based off the ethers. Now, to kind of bring this all home and make that simple, the physical world was in the background of the spiritual world. The spiritual world was in the forefront. Now, as time progressed, as time was even created, the physical world started to take more precedence, and the spiritual world the physical world took more precedence, and the spiritual world fell into the background. So, for example, now we have, we can see shadows out the corner of our eyes, or we'll see shadow people, or we'll see things that doesn't really, or that kind of defies physics, things that are supernatural. This is a hint or clues that there is a spiritual background running in the background of this physical shit. All right, I'm just digressing a little bit, giving you a little bonus. Okay, so with that being said, carnating, reincarnation. Re means again. If incarnate means wrapping the flesh around, reincarnation means doing it again. Now, we hear clues of this in religious texts such as Buddhism and Hinduism. Even we see this in Egyptian texts or Egyptian pantheons, okay? We see this all across the board. In the Egyptian pantheons, you would have, for example, you would have Ramses the First, Ramses the Second, Ramses the Third. What this would be is the person or deity or God in the physical form called Ramses would perish, and then that soul that was inside of the flesh encasing would incarnate into another flesh encasing. Let me take it back just a little bit. The first flesh forms that we will want to call creation or created people were melanated flesh forms. This is important to know. Okay, there are melanated flesh forms. The more because the melanation of the flesh is what can house more of the soul. Now, people nowadays, all people have some amount of melanin. Different kinds of melanin do exist, but when we're talking about that pure, raw, and uncut, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, melanin, the more of that, the reason why the saying is the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, the reason why that's a saying is the more melanin can house more of the soul, period. All right? Now, this is gonna be important in a minute. So basically, the first initial people were melanated bodies. Now, what happens is over time, your soul, because it cannot be destroyed. Your flesh can perish, but your soul cannot. Your soul may reincarnate in another body that is not as melanated or has a different type of melanin. This is what you would want to call races. So your soul does not have a color. It is what it is. And how much of a soul or spirit can house a flesh or incarnate depends on the flesh being. The flesh beings are separate. The flesh beings can mix and become different forms of it. This is what you want to call interbreeding. Okay? All right. So, sidebar. Now, coming back to the original point is we see stories of this in many ancient texts. We see this in the Egyptian pantheon, like I spoke about the pharaohs. This is why those gods would come back and be gods, and there would be like different offsprings of these gods. We see this in what you want to call the Jesus story, or the Yahshua or Yahusha story. This is a story about an energy called Christ incarnating into a flesh being. Everything else is a story. It's just like a storybook. everything else is a story. That's basically what it is. And specifically speaking on that, that is just pretty much telling you about you. The story of what you want to call Yahshua is just a story about what you are. I don't want to go any further than that. Now, we see this in South American pantheons. You know what I'm saying? When we talk about the Mayans, and even older than that, the Aztecs. You know what I'm saying? Because they had their gods too, and those gods would reincarnate into different versions of themselves throughout time. We see this in everything across the board. The Buddha, different Buddhas. How do you have all these different Buddhas? Because it was an incarnation. Okay? All right. Because reincarnation. Why would you reincarnate? You would reincarnate because the original carnations, the original people were gods because they fell and they still had their godly knowledge. They had most of their godly abilities as much as they could in the physical form. Now, over the manufacturing of time, the abilities were lost, and the demiurges casted many spells to make the gods that walk the earth in the flesh form forget. This is why the Egyptians put stuff onto the walls as hieroglyphics as a reminder, because they knew that we would go to sleep because we were cast under spells from the demiurge. Check. Right? So we was cast under spells from the demiurge. Now, go back. That's why the whole cuneiform and Egyptian scribes or writings are very, very important. Those symbols are very, very important. We don't want to go into that. That's a whole nother video. We knew that we were going to sleep, and that's why we had to leave those traces behind for the reawakening when that was going to come, and that time is now. All right, you would reincarnate because you have not remembered who you are or where you came from. That is the reason of experience on a timeline of what you want to call life, is to figure out who you are and where you came from. When you do not do this, this is called experience, you will reincarnate. The demiurge's whole thing is to keep you reincarnating. That's how the demiurge holds power. Without us forgetting who we are, the demiurge will not exist or will have no power over anyone. This is why religion is so pushed. All right, so when we wake up and when we start to remember who and what we are, we will start gathering, or we will start having our abilities again. And just like how I said that, you know what I'm saying, you can reincarnate into a different shell that isn't as melanated. When it is time for you to graduate, to break these shackles of the flesh and not incarnate anymore, more than likely, from my understanding, you will be in a melanated body. So if you came in a melanated body, no matter what you went through, incarnation many times over, you will leave out in a melanated body, because the soul has to be poured in it. It has to be complete all the way around. Now I'm going to do a video. I know I forgot something, but I'm going to do a video about the clip-off. And the clip-off is all about what happens after you die. Where do you go? What happens? I know you're like, how do you know, nigga? You ain't dead yet. Now, with that being said, the whole point of it, all of this shit, is to gain the knowledge, to create the wisdom, and execute the understanding, to help you remember. This is what the whole awakening and ascension process is, helping you to remember. All right? Log on, newmysteryschool.com for more videos like this and tools to aid you in your ascension. Book that study session.